everybody, to the Four Verse Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Sonny Weaver. And on this episode, we've got a special guest, Rex Dickson, joining us yet again. Talk a little Madden. Rex, how you doing tonight?
Great, thanks.
And we are glad to have you. Rex, you know, it's that time of the year. Obviously, the NFL is over, although some would argue it's a year-round league. And Madden's kind of turning into that, well, an August to August setup for a lot of guys. Shout out to NBL. But as you look back, kind of as things start to die down a little bit, I want to do some reflecting on Madden 18 and some of the things that have happened. Let's start out with a question you got the other day on Twitter. I started asking around for people, and one of the people tweeted out, they asked, what was your favorite feature that got into Madden 18 this year? So go ahead and maybe elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, so my favorite feature this year has to be play styles. That's kind of something we've been wanting to get to for some time, and a lot of people said, like, well, that would split our focus, and when we don't know who our identity is, and you can't please everybody, and there was a lot of resistance. But I think we had a good design, and I think, competitive players especially, I think a lot of people forget that last year they were all playing on sim. And we moved, I think, a lot closer to kind of more of the tuning model that the competitive players want. But more importantly for a feature like that is moving forward, we can start building unique systems potentially, and different sort of outcome-based systems based on what each player pool wants. It gives us a lot more flexibility, and it kind of enables us to serve all our cohorts instead of just one. So for that reason, it's really big. And also squads, just because I think for me, squads is still the most fun way to play Madden. And for that reason alone, I'm glad we did it.
So we'll split those into two things because I think they're two very separate kind of views here. Let's talk about squads real quick. When the game first dropped, I know squads was huge. Tons of people playing it. It was exciting. Do you worry about something like that? And if you look back at past Maddens, is there a novelty factor? I mean, do you think that it kind of wears out? And how do you keep breathing life into something like that to maybe make it, have that replayability throughout the whole cycle?
There's a lot of ways I can answer that, and some of them I can't get into because they're part of our plans for next cycle. But I will say, I think we could have made the longevity and impact of squads a lot more significant if we were able to get to things like play a friend and fix some of the disconnect and drop issues that we had in the fall. So I think a few things would have kept people playing longer, and more people would have stayed in earlier if some of those issues hadn't been there. But people have been pretty clear. I think the next step for us is to start thinking about the gameplay experience and how we can potentially make that vary and give groups of people more interesting things to do as a team, as a squad. And so that's definitely in our plans.
All right, so that's cool. Good news there. Stay tuned for more info on squads, it looks like, next year. You talked about the play styles, and we've heard a lot about play styles. It was a big thing coming into the year. And we've talked about splitting those out, right? Sim, competitive, arcade. A lot of people feel like the tuning this year has been very competitive-centric, meaning that a lot of the focus has been on tuning the competitive side. Is that a fair assessment for this year? And if so, was that more to get an even footing knowing that competitive was playing on sim last year, or is it just still trying to find a vision of what the sim players need to have changed to make that kind of play style work for them?
So there's a few ways to answer this. The first thing is a lot of sim players are actually pretty happy with the gameplay. Obviously, they want more features, they want more control, they want more depth, but by and large, the majority of simulation players mainly just talk about how much more depth and immersion they want in franchise. So I don't think, from what we've heard, gameplay isn't in the top of their primary wants and needs. For competitive, it's different because we've been building a largely sim-focused game for almost 3 or 4 years now since I got here, and it's only the last 2 years that we've really started to be like, oh, let's start taking care of this competitive stuff too. So it might feel like our emphasis has completely shifted, but it's actually It's just the competitive model that we're further off from because we spent a lot less time thinking about it. And on top of that, we've built some features that kind of push the game, more in the animation direction and pulling a little bit away from user control. And now we have to kind of like start to pivot back from that to make sure that our competitive players are happy because they obviously want user control to trump a dice roll any day of the week. So that's kind of our charge is moving forward, delivering some of that. And so, I'm just really happy that we're finally in a position to be able to give both audiences what they're looking for.
So you've thrown out some of the things you were happy about in 18, and I know you've talked about in the past maybe the shortcoming of target passing. When you look back at Madden 18, is target passing that one thing you wish you had back? And if so, what do you think where do you think that fell apart as far as being a feature that people really latched onto?
Yeah. As a creative director, sometimes you're looking at something and playing it and you're like, well, this is not working out for me, but I'm a mid-core and I'm not a competitive player. And I kept telling myself, and the designers and the QA team kept like kind of reiterating like, well, this is for high-level players. We said we were going to build a competitive feature. That's what we got. It's not easy to use. But the hope was that somebody was going to use it to create a skill gap, that somebody was going to find a way to master it and kind of separate themselves out from the pack with something that was difficult to do. And so we let it out the door knowing that it was tough and it didn't kind of do what we had hoped it would. But again, this is part of like our journey to kind of figuring out what the model is for competitive Madden. And I'll give you another example. This is another example of something we tried but didn't ship. And we kept talking about like, well, how can we give the user more control over pass accuracy? And so what we thought we would try is like a pass accuracy meter. And if you got it in the green or whatever, you would guarantee an accurate pass and the meter would change based on your accuracy ratings and stuff like that. And it was kind of a disaster. Everybody was like, I don't want to be watching this meter. I need to be making my reads and I don't want stuff on the screen. And so that was an example of one we cut bait on. But, enough of us had had some success with target passing that we kind of felt it had potential. It just didn't work out that way.
And that's interesting because you talk about creating that skill gap. You guys did roll out a mid-cycle feature, and that was audibles on the fly. How do you think that's going as far as that getting adopted by people? And do you think the mid-cycle feature rollout was a success?
I think, a lot of players really appreciated audibles on the fly. Post-launch feature ads, to me, is just an example of a game is not only once a year. And more Madden will become more of like that games as a service thing where much like Mud is today, we're constantly pushing content out throughout the year to re-engage people, to bring them back, to give them a reason to keep playing. That's important to any video game business these days. So I think more and more over the next couple of years, you're going to see more and more of our modes do that kind of thing where they want to release features, they want to release updates in order to answer the things the players want, as well as add new experiences so people want to come back and play it.
We took a look back at Madden 18, and I kind of want to look to the future, and not so much about features that are coming, things like that. Obviously, I know you can't do that, but I want to talk about kind of philosophical things, and one of those being there is a belief in gaming right now, and it's getting a pretty good following, and that there was this heavy push into multiplayer, playing with other people, building communities, so on and so forth. And there's now this rubber banding effect that people are starting to figure out that they don't actually like other gamers. And so you're finding people pull back more into solo modes, solo campaigns. And me personally this year, I was impressed. I'm not a Mutt guy, but I jumped in and played a lot of solos. And Mutt did a really good job of the solo experience and creating a lot of content that the solo player could get by doing without ever having to interact. When you look at CFM, there's a lot of questions in the logic of the CPU both in gameplay as well in management of their team, that makes that not such a great experience. Is that something you guys realize? And what are your guys' thoughts on the Solo CFM, kind of user?
Well, that's interesting. I think those, Mutt's been crushing it with the solos. They're super popular. But the AI you're playing against in a solo challenge is basically the same AI you're playing against in game in a franchise game. I think, for franchise users, they tend to, their demo tends to be a little bit older than the people that are playing Mutt. And they kind of want and identify with completely different experiences. Mutt solo players want to rip through things really quickly. A lot of them are completionists, and they'll rip through all of our content so fast and then demand more, even though there's way more solos than I could ever finish in a year. Versus like the franchise guys who want like the full games and playing 16 weeks. And obviously guys like me with families and stuff love the play the moment feature, which allows them to kind of fast forward. So there's different needs on both sides, I think.
Well, so you talked about the AI being the same, but let's talk about some of the difference, right? So if I'm playing a CFM and I'm playing a solo CFM, so I'm playing a bunch of computer teams, it seems the play calling is pretty standard across all CPUs. It seems that they do the same things in the same situation. I don't feel like I'm getting realistic play calling from both defense and offense. It's almost predictable what's going to happen, and I can manipulate that almost by my own call. When you look at that, and the intelligence, how do you make the solo CFM experience feel like you're really playing different teams and really playing, a chess match against the computer?
Yeah. So let's go to a much higher level topic here, which is it's really basically you're talking about variability of experience. And one of the biggest problems with Madden right now is homogeny of an experience, that basically game to game, team to team, opponent to opponent. And this is true for head to head Mutt as well. And Mutt solos, honestly, like by the time you've played your 200 solo, it's all basically like the same routes, the same routines, kind of you understand, what things are going to be open against what, and generally how the computer is going to test you. This all gets back to variability of experience, and that's kind of like big AI investments, things like, player memory, adaptive AI. You'll hear these topics talked about throughout the community. More unique play call scripts for AIs based on teams. When we build things like, teams that use play action, and we in Madden haven't really invested big into, defenders reacting to run fakes and play action. And if we built that system, we would open up the opportunity to go after things like RPOs. And all of this basically stems back to, the way currently our AI system works, not just on a play call level, a team-based level, but also on an individual behavioral level. We need more ways to kind of separate AI behaviors. Ratings are kind of, they've been good, and they're kind of good at doing what they do. But if we ever want to get to not every safety is going to play a ball the same way, and not every running back is going to look the same or make the same decisions given a specific situation. Those are all things that are on our AI roadmap right now, and they're just pieces we need to get to.
Hey, that's great to hear, and I think that's going to make a lot of the listeners happy, because one of the biggest issues is, like you said, when you start talking about replayability for franchise guys, 16 games a season can feel like the same 16 games, and that can be difficult. This past year, one of the things you guys did, and we talked about this a while back, was you kind of went to a whiteboard and you put up all the legacy issues that you guys knew about, and you just started ripping through them and trying to fix them. Staying on that topic of kind of the CPU AI and CFM guys, there's still a lot of kind of CPU legacy issues in there. That the solo gamer has seen a lot of, one of them being the punt into the wind, the CPU punt in the wind that goes, 20 yards. What does it take for you guys to kind of go back and say, okay, we're talking about single user gamers here, but these are issues that, they've been here for years. We got to knock these out.
Yeah. So great topic and great question. This is kind of how this works. I will carry forward a list. Clint and I will basically pull from Twitter, Reddit, OS, etc., a list of everything we know about. On top of that, we'll also pull from like our Twitter pages. I'll keep a log of every video and bug report that I see that like, and then we go back to last year, and there's this thing when you final software where you're not going to fix every bug. So some bugs are like hard to repro, like they're 1 in 1,000 or something like that. If you can't fix them, they turn into this state. And that state, that bug can basically be carried forward to next year so that we don't forget about it. And any repro information we have, we bring forward with us. And then we make a big prioritized list out of that. Now, here's where it gets a little bit complicated, because there's a term in the industry, and I'll say it, but it's you can't sell a bug fix. Meaning when I'm pitching creative to marketing and I'm pitching creative to my bosses, they don't want to hear like, here's this bug I need to clean up, or here's these list of legacy issues we need to fix, because it's not marketable and it's not really something you can sell. So what we have to do is we have to like figure out a way to like carve out some time to make sure that we account for those things. And a lot of times it's also just QA work. Like all we have is a couple videos, but until we can actually recreate the bug in-house, it's very difficult for us to know exactly how to reproduce the bug, which we need to do in order for an engineer to kind of start fixing it. But with all this said, I have some data metrics at my disposal that this year, due to a variety of surveys we send out, feedback that I receive, what people talk about on social media, that kind of some of these legacy bugs are really starting to drag down people's impression of the game. And I'm using those data and analytics as an argument to my bosses to be like, we have got to start taking this a lot more seriously, so that some of the things that take a lot more time to fix, even though they're not a back-of-box marketing story, I'm still afforded an opportunity to go after them and use some of my team's time to get them fixed. All I can tell you is that you have the right person in charge to make sure that stuff gets annihilated.
It's interesting because I've always been myself a 32-man CFM user, and I've enjoyed that, but I've started tinkering in that realm, and I can appreciate the frustrations of some of the single player guys. And like I said, there's kind of been this rising, I think, of that lately, and so it's good to see that is something that those guys are going to get taken care of. So looking out and looking out to CFM, right? And I've seen you talk a little bit that you guys hear loud and clear, CFM wants deeper immersion, they want deeper modes, and so on with that. Do you feel, we just saw recently the show announce, rainouts and delays in games, and, the batting stance, import and things like that. And obviously 2K always likes to take shots over the bow from time to time when they're coming out with their release. Do you feel like Madden has kept up with the immersion factor in CFM? And if not, do you think that you've got the ammo at this point with your kind of video game contemporaries making those heavy pushes there?
So, honestly, like different modes take different directions, right? I think in sports especially, there's strengths and weaknesses on all sides. I play MLB. I've checked out 2K. There's things to like and dislike about each of them. If you ask me if we've kept up, I think with depth, probably not. Immersion, definitely not. A robust player mode, absolutely not. And so there's a lot of work left to go in order to get Madden's franchise mode up to kind of what we'd call best in class in every category. I don't know that every game's ever going to be best in class in every single category, but we certainly know what people want. Now, the assumption is that, the reason EA doesn't care about franchise mode is because Mutt's making all the money. And to be completely bluntly honest, it's just not, it's not true. There's just been things going on the past couple of years, things that I can't really talk about, but they're internal, technology emergence, like Frostbite integration, all that kind of stuff that kind of drains your resources a little bit. And, there's a few things like that, and some of them are big, and some of that has just had an impact. And so we're not able to do all the things we want to do. But that said, I think last year we hit a tipping point when, we keep making this point, like, look how many people are playing this mode. People love this mode. They're coming back, and we basically owe it to these people to invest in this mode and give them the features that they want. And so I think, in M19, you're going to see a much bigger and deeper investment into franchise mode. It's never going to be everything that everybody wants, because it's always a balance for us. We always have to balance across the board. And so, but moving forward, franchise will continue to be treated as a main primary pillar of the game and will be invested in appropriately.
And that is going to be music to my viewers' ears there. You talked about drains and things like that, and I don't want to cast this in a negative light. We talked once upon a time, and we talked about long shot. And you'd mentioned that that was a thing that was just part of EA's push, and when we first talked about it, it was interesting. I hadn't played it yet, and I went through and I did play it, and I enjoyed it. And one of the things I thought was interesting was I get a call from my uncle. He's a 50-year-old guy, and he's got a nephew, or a son, my cousin, that's 14. And he asked me if I knew anything about this long shot thing. And I said, well, yeah, I've heard of it. And he says, well, when your cousin sits down to play it after dinner each night, we sit there and watch it like a movie together. And, that was kind of that aha moment for me. Like, okay, maybe that's what EA is going for. Looking back now at Madden 18, what are your feelings towards how long shot went over? And do you feel like you learned anything from that experience that kind of helps guide the game into the future about, the do's, the don'ts, and kind of what value that brings?
Yeah, this is going to be a tough question for me to answer. Longshot did really well critically, and I think like Mike and his team crushed it. They were nominated for awards for writing and all kinds of stuff. It was a driving force behind why Polygon named us Sports Game of the Year, because we took a risk, and we took a pretty big risk. Now, if you're a franchise user or a MUT user, for a lot of people, they liked it, but a lot of us core people, we play Madden months into the year. And to have an investment that really only pays off in your first week or so, it doesn't kind of, for some people, it didn't meet like their cost benefit analysis, like, look at you guys spending all these resources on this thing instead of giving me what I cared about. And so, you just have to understand that Longshot was specifically built to try to bring in new users, to try to bring new people to generate interest in Madden. And while it was critically successful, as you can kind of tell from my tweets, it was actually the core that elevated Madden this year. Our core MUT and franchise users came back in record numbers. And so, the lesson learned there, I think, for us is, it's the same people who keep like kind of, are loyal and keep coming back to your game is where your focus should be. And while you always want to take some shots at bringing in new users and kind of growing your brand and growing your audience, you probably, I think the lesson learned is you don't want to do so at the expense of your core. And so it's important, if you're going to try those things, that you need to have a more balanced approach, and you're able to kind of evenly distribute your resources so that make sure that each of your audience cohorts feels like they got, their value's worth that year, or they got enough investment that it was worth it to come back and play again.
Well, so with that in mind, I'm going to throw one more in here, and then this will be the last question. But competitive has been a huge focus of EA, and you talked about Longshot and this expectation that it was going to bring in all these new users. And so, competitive Madden at its very core is a marketing tool for EA to show off the game, showcase, create stars, and want to bring new people in. Do you think it's still early in the rollout of this, but do you think it's accomplishing that? And obviously, you guys have had some stumbling blocks there, but you've been relatively successful. Do you think it's going to continue to accomplish that job going forward?
I'm not even sure that that's the primary emphasis. I mean, there's so many different directions this could go. It could be as simple as somebody just watching like a League of Legends selling out a stadium and saying like, hey, we can get there. You know, I'm sure, you know, Matt has a vision for where this is all headed, and I'm sure larger EA has a vision. But it's so young and so kind of early that I'd kind of hate to like assume that the target was that narrow. It's multiple things. It's getting people excited to play. If you're gonna kind of invest that much of your competitive head-to-head time into like learning the game and getting good at the game, I think you should feel like there's some type of reward out there for the best of the best. I think it's what it's done for the core competitive community is really good, and what it's done for us as a dev team in terms of like, holy shit, we have to step our game up. Like, they're putting us on the ESPN and the NFL Network. And, you know, for a guy like me, obviously, if a bug occurs on those big stages, as it has, it's like a devastating experience as a creative director / game designer when your game is being played competitively, and a bug occurs that kind of dictates an outcome. And so, you know, there's been a lot of like a humbling kind of like, oh my God, we got to get better and get better fast. And so in that regard, I think it's had a positive impact as well. The other part of it that I think is really interesting is being able to kind of listen to competitors and listen to people watching and kind of reacting to the game and seeing kind of like, you know, what represents a skill gap and how does one player stand out versus another? And what are the areas of the game where people have a negative reaction because they felt like it was fluke or the EA bailed or all the other things that they say? And so it's been great from that aspect of like a kind of like a new data point of like, oh, now we can completely see how people are reacting, what they like, what they don't like, and also a lot of time spent talking about the Madden skill gap and how to further spread it out or collapse it and kind of like what features we could build to help competitive players stand out. It's really changed the game for us in a big way.
Well, you know, and I hope that keeps changing the game for you guys, because it does seem that you guys make a lot of progress in viewing those games and seeing what happens, and then it does help drive bug fixes and things across the community. Rex, I don't want to take up too much of your time. Obviously, you've been great, so I thank you for stopping by. And, you know, we'll have to chat again maybe later on when some more developments for Madden 19 start getting released.
Yes, sir. Thank you for your time.
All right, thanks for tuning in, everybody. This has been Sonny Weaver, Rex Dickson. Thank you for watching the 4Verts podcast, and we'll see you next time.